So as the title of this video implies, I'm going to be going over the lighting breakdowns and some of the setups that I used for a recent project that I just completed. It's a Friday the 13th themed music video for my cover of The Cure's Friday I'm in Love. Obviously, it's not a prerequisite for you to have watched the music video beforehand, but if you find horror movie violence as amusing as I do, or if you like the band The Cure, or if you think it's amusing to watch 40-year-old men make complete fools of themselves on camera, then I'll leave a link in the description for you to check it out. But if not, that's totally cool too. Also, just to let you know beforehand, all of these setups range somewhere between relatively to extremely simple, mostly because there were only ever 3 of us on set at any given time, and all 3 of us had to act in the film as well. Anyway, with that said, let's get into it. So the campfire scene is the first setup I'm going to go over. The entire scene was lit with just 3 lights. I had 2 4-foot tubes, and most of the heavy lifting as far as keeping the levels high enough to get proper exposure was done with the 300-watt light with a lantern diffuser. So the first shot I'm going to go over is maybe my favorite frame from the entire shoot. This was accomplished with a tube light mounted vertically just out of frame, acting as a far side key. So in the way it was positioned, which is behind Jason here, we are still keeping the shadow here, but we're also getting a nice little wrap around the face. But it's positioned in a way where that's where all of the exposure from this tube light is hitting. Now, everything else in the frame, including this hard edge light on Jason right here, as well as all of this ambient level we have going on in the background and this edge on the machete, is all being done with a large lantern diffuser placed on a GVM SD300 set to about 60%. I did change my camera white balance to 3800 just to get this color a bit cooler, but honestly, most of the color separation that I'm getting was done in the color grade. One thing that I try to do also is when I do moonlight, I don't really like pushing everything towards a really saturated blue. I've seen it work in a lot of films, but when you have mixed color temperatures, I honestly don't think it works as well as it does in a more monochromatic setting, like in the movie Moonlight, ironically enough. Just as a disclaimer, by the way, I'm not knocking anybody that likes to push saturation into their mixed color temperatures in night scenes. But me personally, I can just never get it to look anything other than cartoonish and unrealistic. And for this grounded, very serious project, it just wasn't the look that I was going for. Now, in these establishing wide shots, me and my date here are being primarily lit by tube lights that we have positioned here behind this cinder block fire pit. We obviously have them positioned upwards, trying to motivate this fire that we have going on. You can see it's not entirely front lit, so we're still getting some shadows just because they're positioned facing upwards, so we're getting that. Also, something that you probably don't notice is that we are being entirely front lit with that lantern diffuser. That's actually where the majority of all of this level is coming from, but everything is being overpowered by these 2 tube lights. But you can see in my jacket here some of that ambient blue light coming through. So in this frame, Jason here is being entirely front lit by that lantern diffuser, and he is a lot closer to it now, so it is boosting a lot of level on him. However, despite that being a giant faux pas in the YouTube filmmaking space, I actually think this frame works. So you're still getting little pockets of shadows by the wrinkles in his pants, and you may or may not notice that the level difference from this part of his calf downwards is not done in post. I wasn't doing that to try to draw your eyes here. It was entirely an accident by a stack of boxes that I used to put my camera this low because my tripod doesn't get low enough for me to get this kind of a shot. Now, I could have leveled this out by using power windows in order to get this to look a bit more realistic. However, I don't think it's that distracting, and I really do think it helps draw your eyes to either us in the background here. You kind of get some leading lines with the framing of his legs leading towards his crotch. Sorry, Anthony. But it also helps draw your eyes to the imminent danger of this, which in a moving frame is a lot more noticeable than in this static frame. But overall, despite me front lighting this entire shot, I think this shot works pretty well. Now in this frame, the tube lights are still lighting us from below. However, I tried positioning hers in a way that wraps around her face in a far more pleasing way. Whereas with me, I wanted it pointed directly upwards, and I was kind of leaning forward in order to get my face to look as manic and deranged as possible. Not that I need that much help. Now you may notice the lack of background level in a lot of these shots, and I just kind of let the background fall into darkness. but that is because this was not filmed in the woods. This was filmed in a backyard in a residential neighborhood, and just back here is somebody else's house. So sometimes you have to work within your limitations. I would have liked to have boosted it just a little bit, but I also really didn't want to be shining a light directly on someone's house at like 11 o'clock at night. So sometimes you have to work within your limitations. So a couple other real quick setups we have going on right here. We still have the lantern diffuser pointing at her that isn't really doing a whole lot, except you can notice the little eye light going on right here. But everything else is done with a tube light placed vertically right outside of frame. You get a nice wraparound, and all of this level in the background is actually done with this tube light as well. You may notice that I keep on placing my tube lights vertically, whereas it seems like it would naturally make sense to have them going horizontally. That way you get a nicer wraparound. Now, in my experience, whenever I do that, it's a lot more difficult for me to get a nice fall off from light to shadow. It's super fidgety. I keep on having to reposition the light, and it just comes out as a lot more flat, as opposed to these 4-foot ones, which can light an entire body a lot better. I just really like this wrap. I get a nice little Rembrandt type of thing going on here. This is a nice little shadow. It's a little bit different if you have a 1-foot or a 2-foot tube light, but as far as the 4-foot ones, I am a huge proponent of actually mounting them vertically. And for my death scene right here, it's the exact same setup. So we just have a tube light placed vertically, lighting this side of my face. It's wrapping around. I got it to wrap around enough to where I wanted enough level over here. That way we can see a lot of this blood trickling down, because why do a death scene if you can't properly see it? So all right, next we have the Christmas scene. This was just a 2-light setup. I set my levels by taking an 80-watt light with a reflector at 5600 Kelvin and just shot it into the ceiling, exposing enough to ensure shadow details, and used this tube light with a grid setup at 2800 Kelvin as my key, just to motivate these amber Christmas lights. Now this setup, like most setups, work better in the medium and close-ups than they do in the wide shots. As you can see here, the color separation is a bit more pronounced as let me just draw this in right here. We have the tube light with a grid. That's a grid, apparently, bringing all the level into him. And then we also have kind of a noticeable blue tint to all of this going on. And that is once again done partially in the grade, as well as the difference in color temperature between the 2800 Kelvin key and the fill at 5600 Kelvin. Now, if I knew that this was going to fall so much into darkness, I really probably would have liked to have placed a practical right there and then taken some small like Aperture MC style light. I think I have one from Ulanzi, placing that out of frame, getting it hard and undiffused just to get a bit more separation from the background, and then you get some level back here. I think that would have made the shot a lot nicer. Also, you would have gotten that warm, cool, warm going on, but I mean, overall, I think the shot looks pretty good. Now, once again, you may notice that I am shooting shadow side using a far side key, which I'm sure you've heard plenty of times, but if you're not familiar with, it's a complete cheat code into adding depth and interest into your shots. Moving on to the green screen setups, where I added myself to the Friday the 13th movies. This is the character I was replacing, where you can see that she had a pretty neutral key light and a hard cooler backlight. So I took her out, and then I had to add myself. So for this shot, I used one of those 4-foot tube lights as my key. So I placed it, just out of frame like I always do. And it's pretty much lighting everything that's going on right here. I took a smaller 4-inch tube light and got a little bit of background separation by setting it to 10,000 Kelvin. But in retrospect, I really should have gone with a larger COB light, maybe even with a reflector. Trust me, that's what a reflector really looks like, just to get more of a strong backlight to replicate the shot a lot better. But to be honest, I was pretty limited in my space, and I was being kind of lazy because I already had this right here for me. Another pro tip, by the way, if you are lazy, tube lights are your best friend. They're small, portable, cordless, and naturally diffused lights. They're just super hard to beat for quick setups with minimal to zero crew. And then for the close-up, I kept everything pretty much the same, except I moved my key light closer to me, because the closer you move your key light to the subject, the softer and more gentle the fall off you're going to get, generally speaking, which pretty much everyone finds to be a far more flattering way to light faces. The last little set piece that I'll go over is the wedding scene, which my lighting setup for this consisted of me waiting until the sun got low enough in the sky to make everything look good. And all I had to do to not mess it up was just not completely front light every single thing. So as you can see in this frame, the sun's just out of frame right here. You can see Jason being backlit, so you get some nice separation. We are losing some contrast because I am shooting not quite directly into the sun, but pretty much into the sun. And then you can also see our dashing young priest here being side lit by the sun, where we get a nice wrap of sunlight across the face. So yeah, shooting around sunset or twilight is another absolute cheat code where pretty much everything you film is gonna look at the very least decent, if not incredible. So everyone does it and they all do it for a reason. It just works. So that's about it as far as the lighting aspects of this video goes. In the next video, I'm gonna be going over more of the technical and creative aspects of it. So if you're interested in any of that, just pull up a chair, stick around, hit the subscribe button and all the stuff. Also, I'm not going to keep plugging my project, but if you found any of this funny or entertaining or interesting, like I said, link in the description. But if you don't want to watch it and you just want to learn from my process, that's cool too.
Farewell, friends.